Hey! So today I would like to talk a little bit about Echo Voices, which is the newest mod that I made, or I guess hacked together, based on the existing code from Lines and Multivoice, which is actually based on monosynth. I mentioned this in the multi-voice video too, but lately I've just been wondering how much is actually possible with Aleph, and unlocking some of the functionality of bees, or just coming to understand bees a little bit better lately has helped in my efforts. There are a lot of other similar devices out there, and I have a feeling that Aleph can do just as much, if not more than any of them with the proper code and settings, but I still have a ways to go on that front. Next, in terms of issues, I really didn't have any major setbacks. I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit more comfortable figuring out the existing code and how to adapt it to get the results I am after. The issues that I did encounter were mainly user-related, and I included some notes in the project directory on GitHub. I've also tried to add comments to the code itself, but, looking back over it now, it seems like some of the comments need to be updated. I got a bit excited after it started working, and forgot to make the necessary changes. I guess, working with sound generation in more complex bees networks lately, I have been wishing there was a top or htop type function to monitor the system and work on optimizations. I know my own knowledge and experience will limit my efforts, but it would be nice to gain an awareness just so I can try to avoid pushing Aleph into the ground each time in terms of processing. Okay, so next, I would like to talk a bit about the code. In past videos, I went through each of the settings in the component files and all of the particulars, such as initializing variables, but since the methods of working with them have remained constant, and because it would make this video much longer to go through each of them in detail, I am going to try and focus on what I perceive to be the central aspects of the code that affect functionality. Since I am still learning about some of the more complex aspects, I also want to avoid conveying information based on an incomplete understanding. Hopefully, I will get to a point in the future when I can present better, more concise explanations, and that is something I will try to keep working on. So, examining the Echo Voices code, it still says multi-voice at the top, but it is actually Echo Voices. I forgot to change that. It is made up of two triangle oscillators from multi-voice, there is one lines delay, and then there's one SVF low-pass filter. In this case, the SVF code is based on a combination of the lines.c code and my code from the SVF video. The lines.c code was really helpful in figuring out how to add a one-pole low-pass filter to smooth out cutoff changes, which was something I did not do in the SVF video. Overall, Echo Voices does what I wanted it to do, and I'm pretty happy. But it does need improvement. I think a lot of that has to do with my lack of familiarity with this type of programming and DSP. There is still some vestigial code in here that comes from lines that I left in just to make sure that it worked, but probably doesn't need to be in here. So, let's just do a quick overview, and then we'll talk about routing. As usual, I have set up all the header files up here. And most of this is based on lines and, originally, monosynth. I needed an audio buffer this time, and I copied all of this buffer-related code from lines. Since the comments in lines.c do a very good job of explaining, I added a comment to see lines.c for more detailed information. I also just initialized my parameters as I have in past videos, and I used lines and monosynth as references. I am using the same methods for voices that I used in multi-voice, but, unlike multi-voice, I am only using two voices total, and both are triangles. I also have some containers and an out bus and a few other things. This stuff is actually based on mix.c, and I needed it for the way I chose to do routing. Here is the SVF filter, and the code for this is also based on lines and the code from the SVF video. As I said a second ago, I also used one-pole filters to smooth out changes and make things sound less steppy. Next, I would like to talk about routing, so let's examine module process frame. Basically, each triangle voice goes to a separate out. Either 0 or 1. The voices also get mixed together and put through lines. Then the line's output value goes through an SVF filter and the final audio is sent to both out 2 and out 3. To go through in a bit more detail, first, up here, I have one-pole filters to smooth out level adjustments. I haven't quite been able to implement envelopes from the DSP directory yet, so this is what I am using instead. I have the triangle voices set up. And this code comes from my adapted monosynth code. I also have container variables for passing the triangle voices with level adjustments, and this is based on mix.c. I've also set up a mix bus. One thing that I want to point out is the order I have used for setting up the code passing audio to the outs. I noticed some audio bleed initially, and I was able to resolve it by passing the dry audio to the individual outs before mixing both voices and sending them through the delay line and SVF. It makes sense thinking about it now, but it was something I wanted to point out. Getting down to the delay part of the code, it says incomplete, but it actually does work, and this is another comment that requires some cleanup. All of the delay code comes from lines.c directly, or has been adapted based on my routing method. And there is another container to pass to the SVF filter. The SVF filter cutoff and resonance code is here, and the cutoff and resonance adjustments are smoothed out with the one-pole LP filters. Finally, the output from the SVF is routed to outs 2 and 3. Having a look at the code below module process frame, we find start fade RD. I don't think that I actually need this because I think it is for fading between the two delays in lines.c. Since I only have one, I don't think that it really does anything, and adjusting the associated parameters after loading the module doesn't appear to change anything, but I decided to leave it in, just in case it was doing something essential that I wasn't aware of. Finally, we have a giant case statement. We talked about these before, and most of this comes directly from lines, multi-voice, monosynth, or potentially mix.c. Next, I would like to talk a bit about lines because lines is very interesting and extremely well documented. Examining the documentation is a great way to figure out how the routing works and what all of the parameters do. It also has a really great explanation of a phasor, a position value, which is updated each sample. Honestly, I probably should have read some of this a bit better. When I was making the demo video the other day, I was having some buffer skip issues, and I am pretty sure it was happening because I didn't set the parameters correctly, and I will talk about that a bit when we briefly discuss the Bees network. In terms of DSP directory header files, one of the most important is buffer.h. It is really well commented, and I recommend examining it. Learning about buffers and how to manipulate them is something that has been a big help to me, and I hope to use in other non-aleph-related projects too. In a separate, non-aleph video on this channel, I talked about a screenless audio review station I made using SDL Mixer. Although SDL Mixer is great, there are some things that it doesn't seem to do, like allow you to increase the speed of playback, and having the working example aleph code is a huge advantage. Next, while I don't want to get really deep into the lines.c code itself, I really do want to talk about mix points. This was something that really mystified me and still kind of mystifies me at this point, but I can also see how the mix points method could be very helpful to future projects. For example, if you wanted to have complex effects chains or routing, mix points would be the best way to go, and I really hope to start using them in the future. Next, I would just like to briefly introduce the BeesOp network that I used for the preview video the other day. I was able to put it on GitHub, and I plan to update the preview video with the link as soon as possible. Based on the buffer skip issues I was having, and the information in the lines documentation about individual parameters, I think it may be desirable to reduce the delay length setting to prevent the skip. I'm pretty sure that's why it was happening. I suppose it could also be the way that I implemented the code from lines, but I seem to remember that I put the length setting on max. While all the fine-grained control of Aleph is awesome, it has been a big adjustment for me, as I am used to simplified user interfaces. In Aleph, you control everything, so you kind of have to think about everything, but that is great. I'd like to finish by doing a really short demo. I am pretty happy with the demo I did the other day, but I thought it might be good to try demonstrating MIDI keyboard functionality too. Thank you.